We'd love to answer any questions you've got. Get as specific or as broad as you want, and if it's regulation-based, or even if there's just a certain concept you're still sort of hung up on, you don't completely understand, please let us know. So any questions? Yeah.
So why would someone want to tokenize a Ferrari? What's the incentive behind it?
Sure. I'll start and then please jump in. I guess I think it's a two-pronged way. So the owner we're talking about here, right? So if he has a Ferrari, it's a collector's item, it's going to be gaining value over time, but while his capital is locked up in this asset, he can't really do anything with it. And so that's that liquidity issue, right? This is an illiquid asset. And so basically in a very basic sense, by tokenizing part of it, or, getting close to all of it, he's going to be able to then get back some capital that he can then use. So basically it's just freeing up that. So that's one angle. Any other input, guys?
Well, at least in terms of liquidity and for tokenization of different things, one example I like to use is for something where tokenization is a really great idea is gold and silver, because that's something that's a very illiquid asset, and that, yeah, you can keep it in your safe and store it. Yes, it's worth money, but you can't walk into the bakery and say, hey, I want a croissant, here's this, collector's gold coin or something along those lines. So I think that that's a really cool element of tokenization in that respect, is you can tokenize a right to a share of gold that's stored in a vault, and then you can also redeem that right at any point in time. So you present your token and say, hey, I want to redeem my right to this gold, then you can redeem it. So I think things like that are very interesting. But with the Ferrari example, I know people always like to talk about cars, but that's kind of hard for me to comprehend as well. So I just wanted to, give an extra.
Yeah, absolutely. So the liquid thing is one angle, and then just from the investor's perspective, it just, again, it opens up so many new investment opportunities. Or you've got a hot tip, that the LaFerrari is going to jump this year or something like that. Here's an opportunity to buy a piece of it, to get a piece of it, I guess.
Yeah, and just adding to that, a very good example which you can draw from real estate tokenization is basically any company that is public, trades sort of above the real estate portfolio. We call this liquidity premium. And any real estate company that doesn't have this public visibility, that is still private, when they want to sell the company or the portfolio or whatever, they typically trade, or they typically get a deal at the liquidity discount, which is 20% less than what they're actually worth. And putting this mindset into what can happen in 20 years from now, when we have most of the stuff tokenized and actually available and transparent, means that the value of those things grow, that the information for these underlying assets is just there. And today we have, maybe every quarter or something like that, we have an update from a company. Sometimes those updates don't really feature the information that you really want to have, but putting the information on the blockchain, which can't be tampered with, is a very powerful thing, and this counts for any tokenization aspect, I guess.
Yeah, I'd agree. Does that answer your question, man? Perfect. Anybody else? I've got a question for you, Mark. Now, you come from the traditional banking world, and you saw, of course, Vontobel quite advanced in the tokenization sphere. What would you say the banks, the traditional, the general, the standard banks, they don't get? What don't they get about tokenization?
I wouldn't say they don't get it. So there's a lot of very smart people working in banks. But working in a bank means that you're working in this atmosphere of not wanting to make a mistake and wanting to be 100% sure that what you do is absolutely right. And the main problem where this fear is coming from is from what Swiss banks or any banks have been through in the last decade, where they did things that they thought were normal and or right, but they got punished 10 years later for actually doing that. And that's a very suboptimal environment to work in. And that's why you won't see big innovation leaps coming from banks. It's going to be the fintechs of the world that need to put out examples and take that leap of faith and go forward and actually show that this stuff works before the big institutions start adopting it.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, Mark. It's a challenge for a big bank to get involved in blockchain projects. Although we see an increased interest also of big banks, but it's a great opportunity for smaller projects. We currently have in Switzerland 2 major projects which want to get a banking license and fully focused on crypto projects. They have very interesting use cases. We see the big exchanges. We have from the Swiss exchange, from SIX, we have a major project. Deutsche Börse also came to Switzerland to create a new digital exchange. So we also see the major financial player having an increasing interest in the tokenized world.
Well, at least in terms of banking too, at least Bank Frick in Liechtenstein is doing an awesome job with dealing with crypto and blockchain related projects. So I think that kind of proves that if you can do it on the smaller scale, then you can do it on a bigger scale as well with some of the bigger banks. So I think that's kind of the consensus, is that it's not going to happen overnight. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And now talking about Liechtenstein, I'd love if you could just, this new blockchain, the TT Act, very interesting, very progressive. What's your favorite aspects of it? What do you think they really got right?
Oh goodness. Okay, so I think honestly, one of my favorite things is that they kind of, everybody else is trying to chase the pre-existing definitions. And then what the Liechtenstein Blockchain Act is aiming to do is say, hey, this technology is still going to change and grow in the future. We need to be more forward-looking than that.
Future-proof.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's what they're trying to design, because they didn't want a law that would be obsolete come 2 years when different things have changed. Because, I mean, Bitcoin might be 10 years old, but then we still don't know what's going to happen with blockchain and DLT systems and where they're going to go in the future. So I think that by remaining more technologically neutral in that aspect, then you're able to encompass more growth and change within the area.
Is there a question out here? Sorry. Yes.
Oh, you can go first.
Oh, please.
Okay, I have a question, and it's a double question actually. The first part is, do you think that the regulatory agencies of each of your countries is doing a good job with respect to tokens? In the sense that, is it regulating fast enough? Is it regulating the right aspects? Is it over-regulating? And the second aspect is, how does the enforcement work of these regulations in each of the countries?
Sure.
Shall I start with the Swiss perspective?
Go ahead.
Let's do it.
Okay, it's an excellent question. We have experience in Switzerland since 2014. So especially our regulators have now a substantial experience in handling crypto projects, and I think that's a major benefit. So in Switzerland, especially FINMA, but also the tax authorities had the possibility to get a lot of knowledge, and at the moment we profit a lot of this knowledge, because now if you go to, for example, the Zug tax authority, they exactly know, that they have a very good knowledge of blockchain projects, and this facilitates the process a lot. And one of the best things we have in Switzerland is also the possibility to get a pre-ruling from a regulator. So if you have a specific crypto project, you can describe your project, you write 10, 15 pages, and then you send it to FINMA, and you receive a very clear answer whether you are regulated or not. So you have a high level of business certainty and a high level of legal certainty. And I think that's very, very valuable for a crypto project. You know in advance whether you're regulated or not. And also because of this aspect, the enforcement is easier then. So you have clear process, you have a principle-based approach, and despite we have a lot of freedom, regulatory freedom in Switzerland, we do not have the regulatory prospectus as Liechtenstein have, we still have a balanced approach, and if you're going over the line, you get sanctioned also in Switzerland. So this was my advertisement spot for the Swiss regulatory.
Well, at least from a Liechtenstein perspective, I think they're going about it the right way. Because as an American, I think the US government is doing everything completely backwards and totally wrong. I think I'm allowed to say that as an American. And it's kind of funny because when I first started work, we had senators' offices and congressional offices calling our office saying, when can we get our hands on an English copy of this blockchain act? And at least looking at some of the regulations that have popped up in the United States, I know Wyoming tried to be a very crypto-friendly jurisdiction. It seems like some of them took inspiration from what we were doing here. At least from reading the text, it sounds pretty similar. But then in Liechtenstein, one of the main advantages is the country is so small, so the lines of communication between us as attorneys and the regulator are very, very short. So it's not common, not uncommon. I think the shortest we heard back on the filing of a legal opinion that we heard back from the FMA was 8 days. So, and then we were actually involved in a securities prospectus for the first, at least to our knowledge, securities prospectus approved by a regulator in the European Securities Prospectus Framework for the sale of a security token. And that was back in August, even before I started work. And I think even with that, which was completely new, the FMA still had a very fast turnaround in terms of what you would, or as opposed to what you would experience in other jurisdictions. So it's very fast. You can definitely get answers to your questions in Liechtenstein. And then the Financial Market Authority also has, it's a whole department dedicated to fielding of fintech inquiries. So I actually heard somebody say the other day that BaFin in Germany was jealous of the knowledge that the Liechtenstein regulators have in this area, because they've really tried to make it a focus and say, hey, how do we attract people in this sector to this country, and then how do we help them bring their projects to life?
Good. Last but not least, Belarus. Belarus is kind of an interesting case, right? So being a CIS country, or not long ago a Soviet country, they have almost non-existing financial markets, and the regulation for the financial market in those countries is pretty bad. So you cannot do good things. And when I look at the rest of the globe, how crypto regulation is being made, they try to fit it into existing regulation. And that takes a lot of time. Obviously, there's good stuff in the existing regulation, but it doesn't always fit with this new technology. And specifically, it doesn't really fit with decentralization. So what Belarus did is they said, like, this is our chance to become the Switzerland of Eastern Europe, or to put ourselves on the map and create a crypto-friendly ecosystem. So what they did is they called for entrepreneurs to come in and explain what they need. And one of those was our company, and we explained what we needed, that we needed to be able to tokenize a security, that we needed to be able to withdraw it, to send it around, etc., etc., etc. Obviously, we needed some tax benefits, like any company that is starting. And those guys really listened, and they created a safe and sound environment. On top of that, they sort of have zero tolerance for money laundering, and they enforce that pretty hard. So any type of crypto company that would like to be regulated under HTTP, but hasn't done serious KYC in the past, will not be considered to get the license, etc. And then on top of that, they gave it a Swiss finish by getting some knowledgeable people from Switzerland to actually review it and stress test it. And I must say, like, the connection to those guys that make the regulation is very good. So there's regular meetings, regular updates, and Belarus as a tech hub is really benefiting from that. So the talent that is being built now there is just amazing. technical people like all over the place. They have really good universities, etc. And you can really build stuff there.
Very cool. I think, and I'll just touch on a couple of things you guys mentioned. When you look around the world at the different methods or approaches towards crypto regulation, you do see a lot of shoehorning like you're talking about. But I think what's really exciting and interesting, especially for you guys out there too, if you're just getting into this as well, when you look at the private and public consultation that's going on in a lot of these places, everyone here has mentioned, the tight connections between the regulators and the companies and the entrepreneurs themselves. And so that's something that's really interesting to me as well. And just a follow-up question for you, Mark. So we're seeing these, Belarus as an example, or the Marshall Islands, some of these smaller jurisdictions that are really going out of their way to be crypto friendly. What do you think the lifespan of these sort of jurisdictions is like? Considering the fact that we might have, for example, Switzerland sort of really catching up with their legislation, or Liechtenstein as well, do you think we'll see a migration in a couple of years back away from these sort of more specialized jurisdictions?
Well, look, I'm Swiss myself, and I'm very proud to say that Swiss people do one thing really well, and that is adopt, right? So Switzerland, and this is the good news, so we have a new law coming up. Stefan sort of touched on that a little bit, and that new, or those amendments, they sort of solve most of the problems that we actually have today and make a lot more possible. So eventually, I think, and you need to understand this from a business perspective, so today Switzerland is one of the biggest private wealth management hubs, and sending money from Switzerland to Belarus is going to be a difficult thing within the next 5 years. I don't see that changing, because regulation is one thing, but a stable currency is another thing, and there's a lot of things that add up to that. But looking this from the perspective of currency.com, we got to start somewhere. We need to get users, we need to KYC them, we need to build up liquidity. And I mean, the very successful banks or the very successful financial service players, they have never been just in one single jurisdiction. And I don't think that it's going to be possible to actually serve the world as a huge trading venue from just one jurisdiction, but it is a starting point. It makes us fit, it makes us ready, and when other chances emerge, we'll take them.
Perfect. Any other questions out there, guys? Yes, please.
FATF, Financial Action Task Force, was pretty much, I would say, not much focusing on cryptocurrencies, which gave all the countries, a big stake to define their own rules. Now in the G20 in June in Osaka, they will focus on cryptocurrencies, the G20, and FATF also will be part of it. So if FATF is bringing stricter rules, I mean, the individual countries may have difficulties to be more crypto-friendly than the FATF regulation. So my question, what do you expect, maybe an over-regulation from FATF?
Good question. I think maybe a fair assumption as well. Any opinions on that, guys? We've seen a little bit of guidance back in 2015. I don't know how much, if you've looked into what the FATF has said before, talked a little bit about on-ramps and off-ramps and stuff like that, but you're right, there hasn't been a ton of conversation. What do you guys foresee?
Yeah, it's a very valid point. There are a lot of ongoing discussions at FATF. It's also a challenge for the group to first understand the functioning of blockchain technology, of the different infrastructures. And the risk is that if the group is not fully understanding the technology, then they might come to decisions which are then not practical. And here that's a substantial risk. At our law firm, we have one specialist also for chain analytics, which is in contact in the working group. And it is a risk for sure, but we hope that it will go in a good direction and in a feasible direction. I don't know whether what's
well, I think the main thing is education. That needs to be one of the main focuses within the crypto community in general. is, hey, we need to make sure that people understand these different systems and what they can do. Because I think people are afraid of what they don't understand, and I think that's why a lot of regulators and regulatory authorities try to regulate things out of existence, because they don't understand the systems. So I think if we focus more on the education side of things and then making sure that the public as a whole understands these different technologies and systems, then that's a good starting point to make sure that there's not over-regulation.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And here's a good opportunity, education. What do you think, if we could clear up maybe 2 misconceptions that generally people have about crypto, that let's squash them right here. What do you guys think?
And I think 2 misconceptions are blockchain or cryptocurrencies are for drug dealers. And the other one is they're wasting energy. So the drug dealer one, what we can say when we understand the blockchain is probably any agency that looks or tries to put those bad guys in prison would be glad if they would be using Bitcoin, because actually you can track it, right? And you can even put some big data analysis on it and mix it with some AI, and then you can see patterns of drug rings and you can bust them really easily, right? So this company that was sold to Coinbase called Neutrino, developed in Milano, they actually did that for a living, busting drug rings. So every time there was bad news in the press, we caught the drug ring using Bitcoin, those guys sort of found the evidence. And then wasting energy is when you only are familiar with the concept of proof of work, but there's tons of other solutions to that. And I don't think like wasting energy is only a blockchain specific problem. That's a society thing, and we need to solve that anyway. So, and there's not the blockchain to be blamed for that. Yeah.
Well, I think what Mark said actually brought up a really good point too, is in terms of one of the misconceptions, because everybody thinks that Bitcoin is fully anonymous and that nobody can find out who you are, but then that's not the truth at all, because you can trace the lines like you were saying with big data. So it's pseudonymous, did I say it? Yeah. But not fully anonymous. I mean, you have different coins like Monero that are, but I think that that's another big misconception in this space as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What about you guys out there? Any questions you've got about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin in general? Anything? Yeah.
Point of sales would be an interesting question. If I have a shop and I want tomorrow my clients to pay in Bitcoin or Ethereum, is there any legal concerns for the shop he has to follow if he's accepting from tomorrow Bitcoins or Ethereum as a cryptocurrency?
In general, if you as a shop accept Bitcoin as a means of payment, there is not a substantial difference to if you're accepting Swiss francs. In Switzerland, we had some big news that Digitec Galaxus, one of the major digital retailers in Switzerland, is now accepting several cryptocurrencies. But from a legal perspective, from my point of view, it's the same situation as if you're accepting Swiss francs.
And I think what you'll see if you were a small business owner or SME owner, there's so many intermediaries now that really grease the wheels to accept. So there's tons of good. Digitec Galaxus is a good point. They don't just directly accept Bitcoin. They have a couple other intermediaries that they run it through. So they're only actually ever touching fiat currency. But by implementing these sort of interim solutions, they do widen it out. So I think we'll see a lot of more progress in that space as well. Just if you could join me one more time in thanking our guests here, and I hope you guys had a great time. So thank you very much.